Welcome to the sixth edition of the Decodable Book webinar series. This one is for parents, and I feel very lucky today, especially because Tre is a busy man, to have Tre Hadrick here to talk with us about decodable books, but reading in general and how to support our kids. It's so very important and it's so powerful to be on the parent end of it. This webinar is not only for parents, but for educators who support parents, because it's so important to know how to explain um, how to help our parents, because if they're our partners, it's that much deeper and more effective for our kids. So you might be aware, or you might not, what's going on right now. The articles are seemingly endless, which a lot of us are not excited about because I wish it wasn't happening, but excited that people are starting to learn that the knowledge is out there, that something is going wrong with reading, that it is not as we previously thought, that it was because of economic status or the type of school you were in. It is a fundamental problem that is happening with reading. And you might have heard words like pendulum swing or reading wars, but really, what we have to look at is the fact that we're moving forward and we're learning more about the human brain, about how kids learn how to read. There's scientific evidence that show us exactly which parts of the brain light up when we're doing certain things, what exactly it looks like to be a struggling reader, and what it looks like to be a strong reader. We also know that just like speaking is very natural, learning to read is not natural. It is not something that happens by osmosis. We don't just sit down with books and learn how to read. It can fool us a bit because some kids will just learn based on whatever method is being taught, but it is a very small percentage. So it's something that needs to be explicitly taught. I can show you all kinds of graphs, and there's all kinds of things that I would love to give statistics and such. But if we look at the National Assessment of Educational Progress, and you look at how many children eh, are not at a proficient level for reading, it's absolutely a crisis that's happening in the United States right now. It can be slightly misleading because it says basic, but really when we're talking about proficient, it's children that can read and can adapt to a text that they're looking at or a book they're looking at. They can pull the information from it. So if we look at 68% of kids not at a proficient level in the United States, there is something profoundly wrong with what's happening. I'm going to put this here because I think that for a very long time, we had misconceptions about why kids weren't learning how to read. We were saying things like the child wasn't trying hard enough, or the families weren't supporting them, or they weren't read to a lot as a child before they came to school. There were excuse upon excuse upon excuse. But really, what's happening is that children need to be taught how to read in school. It's a hard truth, but reading is a right. It's not a privilege. And yet, right now, it it is a privilege. If you notice something's going wrong with your child and you can get them outside support, or you can pay for tutors, or you can put them in a different school and pay for that school, it becomes a privilege, something that you can give to your child. But when children are in school, they should be learning how to read. And so I'm going to show you this. This is just like a little collage of me being a teacher. And the reason I show it to you is because I have a story that is very similar to thousands of teachers right now. It was that I loved being a teacher. I loved kids. I had commitment. I sucked up information. I read every teacher's manual that I was supposed to read. I did it to a T how I was taught how to do it. But I was not teaching children how to read. I was teaching them how to guess. I was teaching them strategies to get through a book. I remember one year making a reading nook for my kids. I spent my own money, which lots of teachers do on lots of things. I bought beanbag chairs. I'd take them home and wash them every weekend. I made these beautiful signs. I thought if I made a welcoming environment for kids to sit down and read, that it would happen. But what I was missing was that kids need to be taught systematically and explicitly the rules behind the sound structures or behind how we decode or sound out words. This is something that a lot of teachers saw. We were taught that there were strategies that kids should use to we call it word attack or to when they came to words they didn't know. It happened through different strategies. So we gave kids strategies to get through a book. It didn't mean that they were reading it. Unfortunately, this is still happening in a lot of places. And as a parent, you want to know because you want to see what your child is doing when they're reading to you at home. Um, in classrooms, I waited until there was a problem and then I addressed it. Really, that that wait to fail or wait and see method, we know it doesn't work in any other arena. So we need to set our kids up and explicitly teach them the rules behind how to read when they're using strategies like looking at a picture or skipping words and going back and seeing what fills in or trying out a different word that starts with the same letter to see if that makes sense. These are not strategies to address the actual words that a child should be reading. So if there are no pictures, or if they don't have a large vocabulary and they don't understand the other words in a sentence, they are not going to be able to read it. It's not attending to the actual words, and it's not how good readers read. Strong readers attend to the text, meaning they just look at the words, they can decode or sound out those words. Um, Really, at the end of the day, no matter what we say, this looking at a picture, this predicting based on the story, this coming up with a word based on the first sound, trying different words to see what fits, these are all forms of guessing, and guessing is not reading. So, what do we need to do then? Well, here's the simple view of reading. Basically, what we know now is that a strong reader, that a child that has reading comprehension, so they're understanding what they're reading, they can read all the words on a page, they need these first two pieces. One of them, language comprehension. This is what we get and what we start getting when we read to our kids. No one is saying that this isn't important, and you might hear that like that we're saying we only need phonics and we only need to sound things out. No, you have to have the background knowledge, you have to have the vocabulary, and you have to understand words, and you need to be able to have conversations. So this all comes from reading to children. It's so very important. This is me with my boys. It's my love language because we give them knowledge, we give them connection, we give them experience through books. And so all of these pieces are vital to being able to attach any kind of meaning to actual words. But there is this other part, and this is the part that is going to teach kids how to read those words. It's basically the mechanics of it. So how do you do it? It if it's not happening naturally, well, we need to give them all of the ways that they get there. So the sound awareness, understanding that the words that we read and the words we speak are made up of sounds, being able to decode those sounds. So, yes, knowing the phonics behind it. And this sight recognition, it doesn't mean memorizing words, but it does mean understanding words that have irregular spellings or things that we haven't learned yet. So, in order to get to this piece where our kids are skilled readers, um, we do need to read to them, but that will not teach them. We need to teach them explicitly. So, based on the title of this webinar, what does decodable mean? Well, decodable is not just a fancy word. It's something that as parents we should all know now or be spoken to about by our teachers. Basically, we have the alphabet, right? You've got each letter in the alphabet. We know that kids learn that in preschool. They might learn the letter names, but it's also important to learn the sounds that those letters spell. So here we've got the consonants. We've got 21 consonants, and they all make a basic sound, except for Q and X. They're a little bit more complex, but they all make a basic sound. So we teach that to children. We also teach them the short vowel sounds. So the 5 vowels, and we teach them the short sound. The reason for that is small words, the words that kids can usually read, have a short vowel sound in them. So exposure is great. knowing the long vowels. I never recommend not exposing kids to something, but when we're actually explicitly, systematically teaching them, it usually starts with short vowels. So basically, decodable is taking those sounds that we know, the most basic ones, and building words that the kids can then read. A decodable word is a word that a child has the skills to read, the sound spellings, the understanding. So a decodable book is a book that a student has the phonics skills to sound out or to decode most of the words. Um, if we're educators and we're helping parents to, we also need to help them understand what those basic sound spellings were. A lot of parents were not taught this way, or at the end of the day, we are our child's best teacher for a lot of things, but it doesn't mean that we know this. Uh, I went to school for it. I got a master's degree and I still did not know this. One of the problems in education. But it's something that we need to be educating our parents about, whether it's a literacy night, whether it's a conference. Um, it, Parents are essential teachers for kids, but they might not know this. So if we want equity, we need to make sure that our parents are also getting this information. I'm going to be giving you this as a download afterwards. It's a sounds mat. So it gives the basic sound for each letter. The first one that we learn, it's used in the most amount of words and the simplest words. It's just a way to help parents understand. So if we take this and let's say we have a collection of sounds we know, a, b, d, p, s, t. I can then build words with those sounds. This is decodable. These words are decodable for a child. Just as another example, again, there you go. Um, it's using what a child has learned. In all fairness, if we think about something, I'm not going to test a child who is doing basic math on higher level algebra. So we're going to use what the kids are learning, their basic numbers, and we're gonna do addition. We're not going to go way above. So it's attaching it to actual reading. You hear about this phonics patch. So a lot of schools right now are taking on a phonics and saying, we're doing it all. Now we've got the full gamut. But if they're not attaching the phonics to actual reading, kids are still having to guess when they're reading. These are the kinds of words that a child should be then given in order to practice the skills that they have. They need to make a connection. It's like if you are riding a bike and somebody tells you how to do it. If you don't practice that, if you don't attach it to the actual experience of doing it, it doesn't have as much meaning. So what do? As parents, we go down the aisles of Target, in the market, whatever, and you find books. It's really misleading because you'll see these level 1, level A, beginner readers. Why are these not the kinds of books I should be giving to my kids? Well, because they rely on the pictures for kids to be able to guess the words. They have this repetitive text or pattern text where it says, like, look at an airplane, look at a horse. It's not words that kids can decode, it's words that kids then kind of catch on to. It's sight word based. So we'll go over sight words in a second here, but sight words are words that kids can't decode yet. Um, and short sentences. So just because something has short sentences, it doesn't mean that it's easy. These are often called leveled readers. That is something that you'll hear, and so as a parent, I think it's important to know. But if we take this alphabet structure that we looked at earlier, the sounds of the alphabet, and we look at a leveled reader, I want to be very clear. Books have a purpose. I'm not saying these books are bad. What I'm saying is that when we are working with our kids for them to read to us, we need to be very cognizant of what we're using with them. So here's this level reader, and I would read this to my child, but I wouldn't require them. Why? There's only one word on this page with this basic alphabet that a child can read. Again, another page in there, just the word on. So how are they gonna figure out these other ones? They're either gonna catch on to the pattern, they're gonna start predicting it, or they're gonna look at the picture. And so what I mean by saying we're gonna teach these letter sounds and we're gonna give them books that actually use those is we don't wanna push our kids to guess. We don't wanna make them feel like they are not skilled, because if they know all of these sounds, guess what? They're doing a great job. We just need to help them so they can apply it. So here's a decodable book. This is the YouKan Reading. And using this alphabet, all of the words that are circled are decodable. So a child then can use the skills that they have learned to actually read a book. This is one of the Express Readers books. Same thing. All of these words can be read using or sounded out using the sounds that are here. We used to say back in the, you know, day or whatever, well, decodable books are these kind of silly, uninteresting books. Well, everyone on here on this picture is a decodable book. It is decodable. It will tell you the sounds that you need to know in order to read it. It has more basic structures in it, and they're all interesting in some way. There's something to grab kids. So we're not saying to kids, you have to only read boring books. What we're saying is we're going to give you a book that has the skills that you have been taught. Um, Another element that's important to understand as a parent is this piece about sight words. I know I got my list of sight words that my child should know by the end of kindergarten. I also admittedly gave these out. We often get the lists, and basically it's things that our child should memorize in order to read a book. Well, a lot of these words are actually decodable. They're words that, or some of them, I should say, are decodable. There is value in repeated practice of these words, but these words are things that you can use that basic alphabet that I was showing you. Now there's another set of these. They're irregular. So there's some spelling in it that no matter how far along in phonics they get, it's going to be irregular. Or it's phonics structures that they haven't learned yet. So if I take that basic alphabet again and I look at this is a short word, just like those earlier ones I showed you. But there's something different about it because the U does not say like a short vowel U would sound. And so in this case, it's a sight word, or it's something that a child might get stuck on. Again, another word, B, tiny word. Looks like it would be super easy. If I saw a page full of words this size, I might think a child could read it. But really, by looking at what's involved in that word, I can see that the child hasn't been taught this yet. They don't know E as a long E yet. They don't know that an open syllable causes a long vowel. So by looking at our words, at the words in a book, you kind of can start to see what the sight words are. Here's a piece about decodable books. Decodable books tell you what those sight words are. They tell you the words your kids are going to get stuck on. And the reason that's important is because our kids' confidence oftentimes hangs on the fact that they want to be successful, just like we all do. And so having a book where you can say to your child, "Oh, that's a tricky word," or that's a word that we get stuck on, or we haven't learned that yet, is so very important to their feeling of value when they're reading. They're using the skills they have, and there are going to be some words that they can't read yet. So no matter which one you're looking at, you will see this high frequency a lot of the time, because high frequency, it's something that you see often. In Express Readers, we call it sticky words because it's easy to get stuck on them. There's something sticky about that word. So they might be very small words, but they can still be sticky. So here you can see there are still a lot of decodable words, but while I'm reading this with my child, I might say to them, hey, this is a word that we haven't learned yet, or this is the word be. It has a long E. Isn't that funny? We haven't learned that yet. No matter what, we're setting it up. We're setting our kids up for success by doing this. I want to show you this because this is so important just to understand that our children are not, um, it's not because they are lazy or they're not trying hard or they're not listening during class. Kids often need repeated practice in order to master something. And if they are struggling, they are going to need so much more. So this is again why decodable books are important, because a child needs to practice something again and again and again to really innately understand it and be able to use it automatically. So really quickly be able to read those words. And we understand now that kids that are reading really quickly, they're actually decoding faster than it's not a memorized, they didn't memorize that word. They're decoding it really, really quickly. And so we need to help our kids by giving them that opportunity. It isn't because you didn't read to them enough. I was told that in kindergarten with my son. uh, you just need to read to him more. Well, I was reading 30 to 40 books a week to him at that point. We were in the pandemic, and um, I wasn't going to be his best reading teacher. So I read a lot to him. And and that isn't always going to be it. So helping our kids practice. Now, so this gets me to my next part in here. A while back I saw this shirt on, I think it's the one in the middle, Trey, the your gorgeous grandmother. Um, I saw this shirt. I he's he's working in his community to ensure that kids have decodable books, understanding something about reading, that something is going on in our schools and it's affecting our communities. And it's so powerful that parents would have this information, because as a parent, I can't be fired. As a teacher, I could. I could kind of evaluate that said I was being insubordinate or whatever it might be. But as a parent, you need to fight for your kid. And so, and the most recently, I do want to mention, because of course I bought it and read it. The forward in Parent Guide to Phonics, helping other parents so that they understand what this is that we're talking about. And so this is where I'm going to, well, I'm just going to leave this up here. So Trey, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Believe me, my pleasure. How did this all start for you? What do you?
So my experience is very similar to many parents. The pandemic was Pandora's box, when it came to education. And I am an educator. But I had my son was in second grade at the time. He was actually in a private school, so sometimes, depending on how people associate that, you're hoping that he gets all the tools that he needs for his education. And honestly, he wasn't, and I don't want to point fingers at the school, because I'm a firm believer, if you haven't been exposed to something, it's not your fault until you're exposed to it, right? So once you're exposed, then you have no choice but to do the right thing. So I don't know if those teachers at the time were exposed to the science of reading, phonics, and everything else. So my son was struggling, and I could see it at home while we're, virtual learning, and it just hit me like something has to change. I knew better. My mother and my father are educators, and it was a little embarrassing as an educator myself, but I realized, it's nothing that I did wrong. I didn't know, and if I know now, I'm going to make a difference. So I was learning a little bit about the science of reading. I did some research. I came across Faith Rakowski. Faith Rakowski, she tutored my son for about 7 months. It was like once a week, an hour tutoring, and went through just basically rewiring his brain so that he could really learn how to read. She did not use any pictures the entire time, except for the letters on the page, right? Because we know that those letters are pictures of sounds, right? That we blend together to make words and everything as such. But the honest, like when she taught him how to read the word tree, for example, she never ever had a tree on the page. Like I can show you the worksheets and everything. Never ever had a picture the entire time. It was amazing, And myself, coming from a family of advocates and activists and just people who fight for the best of the entire community, I thought right away, like, how do other kids get this? Because my son, I was thinking, well, he ended up transferring to the public school because we were home still, and it made sense. And I know some children didn't have that same exposure. And I said, well, if he's in class and everyone is not able to read, or if everyone's not on their, at their full potential, then he's losing, And as you said earlier, Lisa, about you fight for your child, but you sort of got to fight for everybody, because it makes even your own child's situation harder if not everyone's on the same page, coming to the foundation of reading. So lo and behold, from there, I explained some stuff to the guys in the barbershop. Some of the guys had children. We did a book study. We put a decodable book, like library exposable, like an exposure center per se, in the barbershop. Um, people were going crazy. We had there's a sound chart in the barbershop so that people can see, the sounds of the alphabet. I mean, many things you spoke about, and it's just like a whole different world, right? Because everybody, I always say, when you ask many adults how many letters in the alphabet, they'll tell you 26. Then I said, how many sounds? And everybody says, I've never even heard that question. I said, aha,
Yeah.
there it is. And then that starts opening up more conversation and how can I help my children and everything such. And we just started rolling. I mean, I did a basketball event where we did ball out literacy. So we talked about basketball and literacy. We showed clips from the Right to Read during the event so parents could get a little bit of exposure then. And then just it's been rolling. I don't know. I just been doing the own work. This is just a calling for me at this point, and I'm just very thankful.
Well, believe me, I'm sure your community is. I think that you're right in saying that. I mean, we have to care about our neighbors' kids too. And I think being teachers, yourself being a teacher, myself too. Um, when you look at your class of kids, you care about all of them, and I think that that definitely has to be a part of our community too. But when you're a parent, what do you think parents are getting out of the barbershop decodable books? Like, what is it that you see when parents come in? You're saying they don't know the letter sounds, as far as reading with their kids or um, what their school wasn't teaching them.
So I think for parents, one, it gives them power into their child's education, right? I think that's very empowering for a parent, like to be able to help their child with the education that even comes home, like the homework or whatever skill sets they're working on. But also, it helps the teacher, right? Because if the parents have skills, we can't say, children should learn how to read at school, but to become their best reader, I think others have to be involved, right? And that's the parents. The number two would be the parents, right? I know we say education starts at home, but if that's the case, why are we going to school to get degrees and everything else? It doesn't, right? People go to school to become educators to teach, right? So the number two of learning these foundational skills of math and reading is the parents. So if we can get the parents on board and having some support system that they can at least help to some degree, or at least maybe email a teacher and say, "Hey, my child is struggling in this area. Can you look at it when they get to school the next day?" That's even better. So I think once the parents get that power, it's like, okay, I can help my child. I know what to look for. And this is just the reading part, right? We're talking about foundational. When parents are most engaged, usually kindergarten through third grade, and they're able to help at that time, they want to be able to help if they can. And I
Yeah.
think it just makes a world of a difference.
Well, and you and I have talked about this idea of not idea, this fact that reading is right, that it's so basic to being in school. And a lot of the time, we cover it up with things like I just said to you, with coding or ceramics or having
Hmm.
PE, but really at the end of the day, if our kids are not being taught how to read, so that power of a parent to ask questions
Oh
at their
yeah,
school.
I mean, words are everywhere. In this industrialized society, like I spoke earlier, like words are everywhere. Unless they get rid of the words and we go into the forest, the Amazon, or something completely different, which is not going to happen. We need to make sure children know how to read. And even with AI coming and Chat GPT, which is all word, it's still words. It's not
Yeah.
changing things. It's not like it's just a robot that is you're just talking to and it's just doing something. Like you have to read directions, read the answers they give you. Like if you can't read that, you're gonna actually widen that achievement gap. It's gonna get even worse than it is now. So we have to really get people on board immediately because things are gonna change drastically in the next 5 years.
Well, and what do you think decodable books have to do with all this?
Well, I think decodable books are the foundation. I just think it allows children to have a foundation. I'm a former student athlete, and I understand I played football and we started foundation every single year, during our football. It's actually football camp time right now. And it was always foundation, right? We start with your down set hut go, right? Every single time and make sure that everybody's on the same page. But that taught foundational skills. And I think when kids get that, they're able to grow so much faster, and more confidently because they have skills that they can use. Like, I don't want to go to a gym and somebody tell me to lift 500 pounds and I can't do it, right? I get frustrated. I walk out the gym, similar to a child in the classroom. You ask me to read out loud and I can't read. I'm embarrassed. I have a tantrum, and I leave out or whatever. Or I say something inappropriate to a teacher, like, and I've dealt with it as a school counselor. That comes to me, right? And I see the behaviors, I see the issues, and a lot of times kids say I couldn't read, so I was embarrassed.
Well, you actually just stole my next question because I was going to say, I'm sure as working with kids as a guidance counselor, you have to see what some of that trauma, like that not being able to read in an environment where you have to.
Well, and I think, we downplay that word you just said, but it's trauma, right? Like, when kids go through embarrassing situations, no matter how they come about, which if you're not able to read in school, that can be traumatic, right? Like, you're embarrassed, you're hurt, you're sad, you know the feeling, you know where you were when it happened, all those things that we talk about for even more traumatic situations, but that's still trauma, right? And then you feel it in the school setting. So now
Mhm,
you're avoiding school because you know that feeling, you don't it all plays a part, right? And we don't want children to feel that way. We want them to feel confident when they come to school. We want them to learn. We want them to build with other students, i.e., why we want a holistic approach for everybody so they can all be on the same page.
mhm. Well, we talk about that safe space. I mean, I know as a teacher, you wanted to make a safe environment. I mean, that includes so much. So
Mhm.
they are fed if they need to be. They, aren't scared of any outside forces while they're in school. But
Mhm.
it's also not making them feel that trauma again and again of
Yeah.
feeling
No, and
not.
it's so true, and that's part of it. Like, and we don't look at it like not knowing how to do a problem in math or not knowing how to read a word is not feeling safe, but it is. I mean, I was a kid who struggled with reading when I was younger, and I'll tell you right now, when it was time to read out loud in the classroom, I would put my head down and act like I was asleep. I promise you, I did, and I was gifted in all those things, but in that little space, I did not want to read, right? And I struggle with that, and I see how that can happen to other children. And really, it's something you want kids to get because it builds confidence. It really does in this society. Being able to read, especially being able to read out loud or being able to express yourself, builds so much confidence within a child for whatever they want to do in life.
Mhm,
And it's foundation, and that's why we're in school to make you a great citizen. That's the ultimate goal.
mhm,
So we have to do that, and it
mhm.
starts with reading.
Yeah, and when we talk about, SEL or social emotional learning and teaching kids how to care for themselves and care for others and know about their emotions and then if they can't read, what are we telling them, you know?
Well, and I think, talking about it's how they can express themselves. So some students have the confidence to speak up initially, right? Or some kids might be able to write, but if they can't, then they're blowing that up, right? So if there's a book out there, there's a child, like kindergarten through third grade, a very easy, even if it's decodable per se, and you'd hope they get to be able to learn through that decodable book. But if it wasn't decodable and it's trying to talk about feelings, and a kid can't read that, they'll never be able to say, you know what, I feel like that sometimes when I'm at
Yeah.
home, right? And it never comes out. So it just keeps balling up. It gets bigger and bigger until the child explodes. So when
Mhm,
you're able to have these skills early on with reading, obviously that turns into being able to write. So now you can get your feelings out that way, right? And then you're able to read something that might bring a relation to you or a correlation, and you're saying, okay, I feel like that. So it just helps. We have to learn that early on because mental health is a challenge for everyone. No one can escape it. And the earlier we can allow children to be able to handle it and not even deal with it, just be feel comfortable with it, it allows us to better the society as a whole. So and all this goes down to words. We're in a major, this is always words are everywhere. Like you can't looking at everybody's computer right now or your cell phone. There are words there. There's no way around it. So we have to make that like you say, a right. I have my pen on right now.
mhm.
It's part of it.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, I had a really poignant conversation. This is on topic, but off topic about the suspension rate. in my school district and talking, there was this comment, well, these kids weren't behaving in class and it spirals. So we need to get to that early. And then my comment was, do you know how many of those kids couldn't read or
Yeah.
weren't taught? And can you imagine maybe there's something else going on, but compounding that with every day going to a space where you're supposed to feel safe and you're being told that you can't or you're not worthy of it or
Mhm.
you know yeah, I think there's so much correlation.
Yes, and a lot of people talk about the school to prison pipeline and different things. So I definitely think that's a foundational start when we're not successful, in that space. Um, I put a quote out there a long time ago, like students are never suspended because they can't read. They're suspended because of other problems that usually happen because they can't read in class, right? So why not get to the core of it and find out why they're having this behavior, and as soon as if the kid is suspended more than once, it should be almost guaranteed that we need to check the reading levels, check out,
Right.
find an evaluation that not just goes off the grades that the child is receiving, because we know grades don't ever always tell everything. We need to really find out the growth and where this child is, and that'll
When
make
you
a world
say
of a
that,
difference.
the grades, uh, just as like a personal reference, my son was assessed at a level C in kindergarten,
Okay.
and he didn't know any of his letter sounds. So, we're saying, "Oh, kids can read all these books." I mean, we have to really look because I know we wanna trust our teachers, and I think we should.
Mhm.
But we also need to ask questions
We
because
do.
just because you don't have the same education that the teacher does, with what's happening right now, there might be something deeper going on.
Right. And I think parents have to understand that, putting the power in your hands saves your child, and like I mentioned earlier, that it helps the teacher because you can help at home, but also number one, it saves your child. So you have tools that you can say, I know better than this, and I've found people in my community, like there's few people I've come in contact with who's been really trying to roll and learn more about literacy and dyslexia and everything. And they don't have degrees, they're not quote unquote college educated, but fortunately these parents can read enough to understand the material, because like this book that you're showing on the screen now is written in probably third grade, or it's very easy read, right?
Yeah, it
So
was.
fortunately most adults can read that and then hopefully comprehend what's in that book, right? But then the bigger key is they can go back and help their child. So I just think that it's important that we get the power in your hands so you're able to help your child. I mean, it's nothing better.
Yeah, well, because as we said, like all the reasons why if your child can't read, you know, there's so much that goes with that. And there's so little, like there's no equity in
Mhm.
their existence.
Correct.
That's an awful way to say it, but like you can't access anything. We get math word problems home in first grade. If your
Hmm.
kid can't read it, they can't do the math. You
I
got your
mean,
science experiments,
what you just said is I felt last year. My son, he is going into sixth grade. He's a
Mhm.
rising sixth grader this fall. But last year, the math curriculum was definitely heavy literacy, with a lot of words and reading and word problems. And I felt that over and over. And I'm like, how are these other kids who
Yeah.
I know don't have the skill that he has,
Mhm.
right now? How are they surviving? Like, this is not the game plan. The game plan is for everyone to get to their full potential. It's not to see your weakness and just say that's the best you can do. No, how do I get you to your full potential? And it's not right.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I've said it, and I'll say it again. Thank you for what you're doing. Um, Trey also has 2 is it 2 books out, right?
Two
Kids book.
children's books. Yeah, you can see them actually in the background. The
Yeah,
little boys holding them in the background.
yeah.
Teeth and Clippers. They're not decodable books. They
No.
are more, entertainment. It's fictional books, but they are sort of nonfiction because they're based on experience that children have in a barbershop, particularly in the Black and brown community. But it's just they are definitely, some people call it the new Fat Albert, or and
Love
so they have, yeah, people love to read the books, and they're really good. I mean, I've been blessed to have a great team around me to help me produce those. Um,
that.
those
Well,
books.
we're
But
gonna link it on our page after this
awesome.
webinar, so we'll link to those books as well. Because I mean, I'm an avid my kids have so many books.
Yeah,
You
no,
know, they
people
don't
love them.
all have to be decodable. It's
Yeah.
up
Well,
to them.
once they get to the point they have the skills, then it doesn't
Yeah.
need to be decodable, right? That's the whole point. Yep.
Well, and reading to your kids gives you a chance to have conversations and that
Right.
connection and, I mean, that's so important to them being able to access reading later
Yep.
once
Yep.
they can.
Yeah.
Um,
And that's
yeah,
want to say one last thing, that what you
yeah.
said earlier when you were told that you didn't read enough to your child, and I was going to say, then I was listening and I was saying that, from what I'm learning now, reading to your child allows your child to be exposed to words, but also be a good listener, right? And understand stories and love stories. But that has nothing to do with them picking the words off the page, right? That's a total different thing, right? Because you could hold a book and face you the whole time while your child is listening to the story. And how are they learning how to read from that, right?
Well, and you said it too, that love for reading. Like, I could give my child the love for reading by showing them that I love reading and showing
Mhm.
them the beauty of stories and being immersed in books. But we don't teach the love for reading. We teach kids how to read because it's really hard to love something that you can't do,
Mm.
you
Mhm.
know?
So
I
true.
mean, it's super poignant that you say the love for reading because I
So
know that's a
true.
big piece. Well, I appreciate you being here. I know you're super busy and I'm going to link all of these resources on our page when it comes out. So thank you for having this conversation with me.
Well, thank you for having me. I mean, I'm blessed that I can share my experience and some of my expertise at this time, with advocacy to get what you deserve for your child.
I think you're an incredible um role model for other parents who weren't necessarily educated in this specific topic, but
Hmm.
now have the education to speak on it, and you've absorbed all that knowledge and tried to find all your sources, which makes you a valuable
Yep. And it,
this.
it has nothing to do with, my education, right? Being a counselor or and all these other, from just being a parent, and wanting the best for my child. That's it.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank
And
you.
I'll talk to you soon. I'm gonna just finish up real quick because I want to help the educators to understand, how can we help our parents support our kids at home. And one of the ways is to have a lending library of sorts. So sorting your books by skill level or what you're doing in your class, so that you can send those books home with kids, so that parents don't have to find those books themselves, whether they're printed, photocopied, actual books, whatever it may be. Um, Helping teachers have a way, so not just a reading log, because it's not about quantity of reading, it's about the quality. So if you're providing the type of reading and you're having kids practice that reading again and again or in different sources. Um, so what I would have loved to see as a parent was something that said, please read to your child every 20 minutes, or for 20 minutes every night, and it be about that. Until my child could read, and then maybe seeing something home. It's about giving our parents ways for our kids to attempt words that they don't know. So, you know, we don't know as a parent, it's not innate for us to know exactly how to help our kids when they come to a word that they're stuck on. So, by really front loading it for our parents and helping them understand. I would also be remiss if I didn't talk about the fact that there are decodable books for older kids, because there is, like you heard Trey and I talk about, this emotional part of reading that has to be attended to. So if kids are still struggling, or they haven't been taught how to read, or they are in one of those ranges that needs 40 to 200 times to practice something, they don't necessarily need to have a book that looks like it belongs to, um, you know, an early reader. So there are series coming out now that have books that look like chapter books, or that are chapter books, but they have more basic sound structures. And so finding these books, I think, is so important for our kids. There's also different kinds of books that you can use with kids now, so that it's more interesting if they have to continually practice, or if they find, your basic, I don't want to say basic because I'm biased, but um, your typical decodable book. We've got Pat and Pals, they've got a decodable graphic novel, and the Orca 2 Read Megan Gregg books that has like a shared reading. So one reads and then the child reads, or maybe you've got kids that are different ages or at different levels, and one can read higher than the other. Helping our parents to understand through correspondence that words are made up of sounds, that the words that we speak become words on the page, and they're all made up of sounds, and helping our parents to support that in the home. So I'll be giving all of these resources on the webpage that we have, because guessing is not reading. And the more that we can help our parents, and the more as parents that we can understand as we're reading with our child, that if a child is guessing, we need to ask more questions. And also that if you have to get tutoring or you have to do something outside of school, maybe it's worth asking, how are we teaching reading in school? Um, Also, we will have our webpage that will have the quiz. So if you're an educator and you need PD credit, there'll be certificates available there with the quiz. And we'll also have all the files that I was talking about today. I'll also be linking to Tre and all of the wonderful resources he's involved with. We do have one more webinar supporting dyslexia. Please go ahead and scan the QR code for free samples, hard copy samples of the Express Readers books. And that's it for today. Thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it. And we'll look forward to one more week.